Hey guys, welcome back. I know I haven't posted in a while and I've been pretty busy lately, but I just wanted to do a quick little video on how to prevent a deadlock. Now, this is a question that comes up on a lot of interviews, and it's definitely something that you need to know off the top of your head. Based on my experience, I've been asked this question multiple times throughout the interview, and I just wanted to just provide some insight on how you can go about preventing a deadlock. So let's get right into it. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what is a deadlock? Now, a deadlock is basically two threads that are waiting on each other to release a resource. So you pretty much just have to think of a deadlock as two threads. Let's say we have thread 1 and thread 2. And whenever you run those threads are going to be acquiring a lock on a resource. So let's just say we have thread 1, and in thread 1 it acquires a lock on a resource, and thread 2 also acquires a lock on another resource. And let's just say after thread 1 acquires a lock on that resource, it tries to make its way to acquire a lock on another resource, but thread 2 already has a hold on the resource that thread 1 wants to acquire, and thread 1 already has a hold on a resource that thread 2 wants to acquire, and that would result in a deadlock. Now this picture may make it a little bit more clear for you. So let's say we have thread 1 and we have thread 2. So thread 1 is going to try to acquire a lock on this object. Well, it has already acquired a lock on this object here. So after it acquires a lock on object 1, it wants to acquire a lock on object 2. But thread 2 is already holding a lock on object 2. And thread 2 has already acquired a lock on object 2. And it's trying to acquire a lock now on object 1, but it can't acquire that lock because thread 1 already has a hold on it. So as you can see here, this would result in a deadlock type situation. Next, I wanted to give you guys some real life examples of a deadlock. All right, so as you can see here, we have different cars that are trying to make their way to the other side of this street so they can go where they need to go. But as you can see right here in the middle, we have a deadlock situation. So if you look at the cars that are lined up right here, these cars are trying to make their way over to this side of the street. We can also think of these cars as threads, okay? Now, these cars are not able to make it to this side of the street because these cars, which are also threads, already have acquired a lock on a resource, and the resource will pretty much be a part of the street pretty much. So as you can see here, this is a real world example of a deadlock situation. It's pretty straightforward, and I'm sure you can see some of the similarities between the deadlock and the real world in this picture right here. All right. So here's another example. Just think of two people who are playing tug of war. Now let's say that each one of these people are the same. They have the same weight, they have the same strength, and everything about them is the same. And let's just say they're never going to give up at this game of tug of war. So this is another example of a deadlock situation. One thread is trying to acquire a lock while another thread is already holding a lock on that resource. And that resource in this example would simply be the rope being pulled between the two people. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. All right, so the next thing we want to ask ourselves is, how do you prevent a deadlock? The answer to that is order. Now, I wanted to provide some pictures here that really explain how order helps prevent a deadlock situation. So if we look at this picture here, in the top left hand corner, we see a long line of people, and they're trying to make their way through this door here that you see. Now, if all these people tried to squeeze through this door at the same time, there would be a deadlock situation. They're all trying to acquire a lock on a resource that another person is already using, and there's no way that they could fit through that one door if they were to try to push their way and make their way through that door at the same time. So in order to fix that problem, there has to be order. Now, we have a picture down here in the bottom right hand of the screen, and basically we have a puzzle. Now, whenever you're putting a puzzle together, and I'm sure you guys have done this before or have at least played with puzzles before, but when you're playing with a puzzle or when you put in two pieces of a puzzle together, there has to be some level of order. So as you can see here, we have one puzzle here with a groove here, and then we have another puzzle here. And if we put them in the correct order, then these puzzle pieces will match together. And then we just continue that until we completely, finish putting all the pieces to the puzzles together pretty much. All right, now let's just say we had two pieces of a puzzle and we tried to place them both within this same groove. That will result in the deadlock situation again. So I just wanted to just provide, some real life examples of how you go about preventing a deadlock. In more technical terms, in order to prevent a deadlock, you have to ensure that both threads acquire locks in the same order. So if you're ever asked on an interview, how do you prevent a deadlock, just say you have to make sure that both threads acquire locks in the same order. Another thing you can say is if you provide ordered access, then the deadlock will be resolved. So if you ever ask this on an interview, remember these two bullet points right here. All right, so what we have here is a code that simulates a deadlock type situation. And I wanted to walk you guys through this so you have a clear understanding of how you'll go about creating a deadlock and how you'll go about resolving a deadlock. Later on, there's going to be a code example that I provide within this video, so just stick around for that. But right here I just wanted to show you how to write code to create a deadlock. Alright, so first of all, let's say we have two classes. We have thread 1 and then we have thread 2. Alright, so as you can see here, thread 1, we're going to have a run method, and we also have a run method in thread 2. Alright, so if you go back to thread 1, we have this run method, and in order to acquire a lock on a resource, we use this word called synchronized. This is going to allow us to acquire a lock on a resource. So we're going to have some resource that we have here, and then we're going to write the keyword synchronize in front of this. Alright, now once we acquire a lock on this resource, what we want to do is print this out. Thread 1 locked resource 1. So basically we're just going to have a message printed out to the console saying that thread 1 has acquired a lock on this particular resource. Now thread 2, if we go down to thread 2 class, this is pretty much doing the same thing, but we are first acquiring the lock on resource 2. So after thread 2 has acquired a lock on resource 2, we're simply going to print out thread 2 locked resource 2. Sounds easy enough, right? Alright, so if we go back up to thread 1 and we call the synchronized synchronized, we try to acquire a lock on another resource that you see here. We already acquired a lock on resource 1, and we're trying to acquire a lock on resource 2. We won't be able to do that. And the reason we won't be able to do that is simply because thread 2 already has a lock on this resource that you can see right here. So we won't be able to move forward, and simply because thread 2 has already acquired a lock on a resource 2. So this would result in a deadlock situation. And it goes the same for thread 2. Thread 2 cannot move forward because a lock is being held by thread 1. Thread 2 tries to acquire a lock on resource 1. It can't do that because thread 1 is already holding that lock and can't move forward until another lock has been released. So that is how you write code to create a deadlock. Now, what I wanted to do here is show you how you would go about resolving a deadlock. Now, if you remember what I said in a couple of slides back, in order to resolve a deadlock, you have to make sure that the locks are acquired in the same order. So as you can see here, once again, we have thread 1 and thread 2. So thread 1 is acquiring a lock on resource 1, just like we did before, and it's simply printing out this message, thread 1 locked resource 1. Now, if we go down to thread 2, we're also acquiring a lock on resource 1 here. So basically, the resources are going to be acquired by both of these threads. So if we go back up to thread 1, it's going to acquire a lock on resource 1, and then it's going to acquire a lock on resource 2, pretty much. So this is pretty much how you would go about resolving a deadlock. As I said before, when it comes to resolving deadlocks, you have to make sure that the locks are acquired in the same order. These threads are both going to run. They're both going to acquire a lock on whatever resource that we specify. Obviously, in this case, we're going to be using this resource 1, and you have to acquire them in that order in order to prevent a deadlock, and it's pretty much as simple as that. So if we were to run this code, then we would get each one of these messages printed out, and I'm going to show you actually how to do that in code. So let's get right into it. Alright guys, so in this part of the video, what I'm going to do is show you how to go about and create a deadlock, and then afterwards I'm going to show you how to prevent a deadlock. So we're just going to jump right into it. So as you can see here, I have myself an empty project. I have my application object here that is called app.java, and the first thing that we want to do is create two classes. We want to name this first class my thread 1. Then we want to go to finish. Then we want to create another class, new class my thread 2. Go to finish. And first of all, the first thing that we need to do is to go to my thread 1 class, and as you can see, this is simply a class. And in order to convert this to a thread, the only thing that we have to do is to extend thread. That's how you'll go about converting a class to a thread. I've talked about this in a previous video all about threads. There are two ways that you can create a thread: by extending the thread class or implementing the runnable interface. In this case, we're simply just going to be extending the thread class. If you need more clarification on that, I've actually created a video relating to how to create threads. So go look back at that if you have any questions or anything like that. So after we extend the thread class, just like in my slides, the next thing that we need to do is to create a resource. We're actually two resources that we're going to be using so that this thread will be able to acquire a lock on these resources. So let me zoom this in for you guys. Alright, so we're going to be creating two resources. So public string resource 1. And then we want to just set this equal to just a random string. I'm just going to set this equal to hello. And then we're going to create ourselves another resource. String resource 2. and then we're going to set this equal to goodbye. So we have our two resources. Now, whenever we run a thread, we will have to call the method dot start. And basically, when we eventually go back to our application object, we're going to be creating an instance of a thread and then calling thread.start in order for certain code to be executed. Now, when you're working with threads, you have to implement the method public void run. This is basically a method that's going to be called when you try to run a thread. So in this public void run, what we want to do first is acquire a lock on resource 1. That's what we're going to be doing in this myThread1. So in order to do that, we would simply just have to use synchronize. And as you can see, what we're doing here, we're trying to acquire a lock on resource 1. So we just go synchronized, and pretty much just going to have something that looks like a parameter here. We want to pass in our resource, and then after we've acquired a lock on this resource, what we're going to be doing is simply just printing out a message to the console. So what we want to do here is thread 1 acquired a lock on resource 1. All right. So this is pretty straightforward. The first thing that we're doing, we're trying to acquire a lock on resource 1, and then we're just simply printing out a message if we have acquired a lock on this particular resource. Now, what we want to do next is actually go inside of this synchronized block here, and simply add ourselves another synchronized block in which we're acquiring a lock on resource 2 now. Now we simply just want to do the same thing that we did when we acquire a lock on resource 1. But the only thing that we're going to change is the message. So we're acquiring a lock on resource 2, and that's pretty much it. So what we're doing here, we're acquiring a lock on resource 2, and then if a lock is acquired on resource 2, then we're simply just going to be printing out this message right here. Alright, so another thing that we need to do is call this thread.sleep. Now the reason that we're calling thread.sleep is because threads and deadlocks are synchronized. And basically, threads and deadlocks, they are asynchronous actually, which basically means that they do not run at the same time. And in order to make sure that these threads that we're going to be using, thread 1 and thread 2, run at the same time, we have to force a deadlock by adding this method, adding this sleep method here. So we pretty much are just going to call thread.sleep, and it's going to sleep for 100 milliseconds. Just surround this with try catch. And let me just add a comment here so we have a clear understanding of why we're writing this. So basically, yeah, as I said before, threads and deadlocks, they are asynchronous, which basically means that they don't run at the same time. And in order to force a deadlock, we have to make sure that these threads are running at the same time. So we're pretty much just adding this sleep method so we can wait for this myThread2 to acquire a lock on a resource that it has before this thread moves forward. And this is basically, as I said before, just used to make sure that we force a deadlock situation. All right, and this is pretty much it for my thread 1 class. To just run through this one more time, we have our run method here. In this run method, we're acquiring a lock on resource 1, and then once the lock is acquired on resource 1, we're simply just printing out this message to the console. And then down here, we're acquiring a lock on resource 2. And if we acquire a lock on resource 2, then this message will be printed to the console. And that's pretty much it. As I said already before, this is pretty much just used to force a deadlock situation. And that's pretty much it for my thread 1 class. And what we actually want to do now is start implementing my thread 2. So what we want to do, simply just copy this, because the code that we're going to be writing in my thread 2 is going to be similar, but there's a few things that we need to change since we're going to be under my thread 2 now. So the first thing we want to do here, just like we did before, extends thread. And then we can simply just go into our class and paste. So as you can see here, we have our resources, resource 1, resource 2. And what we're going to be doing here is, first of all, acquiring a lock on resource 2. And we just want to update the message that's going to be printed out. Since we are now in my thread 2, we want to say, instead of thread 1, thread 2. Acquire a lock on resource 2. And then we just want to do the same thing down here. We just want to make some changes. We're then going to be acquiring a lock on resource 1, and then change this to thread 2. And then we simply just want to update this message down here to 1. So as you can see with my thread 2, what we're doing now, we're not acquiring the locks in the same order. And this is pretty much how you'll go about creating a deadlock. So what we're doing here, we have a run method, and then we have our synchronize block, which is going to acquire a lock on resource 2, print out a message. After it prints out that message, it's going to wait for my thread 1 to acquire whatever lock it needs to acquire on the resource that it has, and then from there it's going to try to acquire a lock on resource 1. But this code that I've written is pretty much used to force a deadlock type of situation, and when I run the code, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. So we're pretty much done with these 2 classes, my thread 1 and my thread 2. And the next thing that we need to do is to actually go to our application object, which is this app.java. Simply just create an object of my thread 1 and my thread 2, and then after that we're gonna run both of those threads. So we'll just go my thread 1 t1 equals new my thread 1. Then you want to do the same thing for my thread 2 t2 equals new my thread 2. And then to run these 2 threads, we just want to go t1 dot start and then t2 dot start. Save this and zoom this out for a minute. Alright, and then we just want to simply run this application now. And as you can see down here in the console, we have thread 1 acquired a lock on resource 1, and thread 2 acquired a lock on resource 2. But it doesn't show the other messages printed to the console. And obviously the reason why is because we're forcing a deadlock situation. So basically, when we call my thread 1, it's only printing this out but it's not able to make its way to acquire a lock on this resource because another thread already has a lock on resource 2. So resource 2, it already has a lock on resource 2 here. And just like my thread 1, my thread 2 is not able to make its way to acquire a lock on resource 1 because my thread 1 already has a lock on this resource. So this would result in a deadlock situation. And that's pretty much why we're getting these two messages printed out to the console. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Now, what I'm going to do is simply just show you how to prevent a deadlock. Now, I spoke about this in my PowerPoint presentation, and it's pretty simple. So the first thing to note is that in my thread 1, we're first acquiring a lock on resource 1, and then we're trying to acquire a lock on resource 2. So in order to prevent a deadlock, we have to make sure that the locks are acquired in the same order. So thread 1 acquires a lock on resource 1 and then resource 2, whereas my thread 2 acquires a lock on resource 2 and then it acquires a lock on resource 1. So as you can see here, these two threads are not acquiring locks in the same order. And in order to prevent a deadlock, we have to make sure that they are acquiring the locks in the same order. So what we're going to do here is simply just go to my thread 2 and then change this resource to resource 1. And then we just want to update the message that you see here. So we're going to first of all acquire a lock on resource 1. Then it's going to print out this message. Thread 2 acquired a lock on resource 1. And then we just want to go down here and go to resource. We want to write resource 2 here. So it's going to acquire a lock on resource 2. And then we simply just want to update the message right here. So that's pretty much it. That's how you'll go about resolving a deadlock. You just have to make sure that the locks are acquired in the same order. So if we go up here and simply just run the application, let me zoom this out for you guys. And we run this application again. We save everything and then we just run. Let's see what we get. All right, so if I zoom this in for you guys, you can clearly see in the console that thread 1 is going to acquire lock on resource 1, then thread 1 is going to acquire lock on resource 2, and then thread 2 is then going to acquire lock on resource 1 and then acquire lock on resource 2, which is how you would go about preventing a deadlock, and we get the results that we want. And that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video if you've learned something from here. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And see you in the next one.